The gavel hovered in the air, suspended as if time itself had stopped. Every breath in Courtroom 7 was held captive. A trembling finger rose. 8-year-old Elijah Washington pointed directly at Judge Rebecca Williams. His voice, raw and shaking, pierced the heavy silence. "You're my real mom. I remember your perfume. I remember your lullabies." The judge's face lost all color. Her gavel fell with a sharp, startling crack. "Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable chain of events, I want to know, where are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments, smash that like button if you're ready for a story that will leave your jaw on the floor, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will rock your entire understanding of justice, truth, and secrets buried for years. This isn't your average courtroom drama. This is the story of a young boy whose words would uncover one of the most shocking conspiracies ever to shake a family court. Judge Rebecca Williams had spent over 2 decades forging a flawless reputation in Detroit's family court system. At 52, she was hailed across Michigan as the Iron Lady of the Law. A black woman who had climbed out of poverty and worked her way to the top of the legal world, she was a figure of strength, order, and discipline. Her courtroom was her domain, her rulings were definitive, and her authority was unquestioned. She had overseen thousands of custody disputes, adoption cases, and family conflicts, always with an unshakable presence. But nothing in all those years had prepared her for what would unfold today. It was an ordinary Tuesday in October. A crisp breeze carried the smell of burning leaves through the courthouse corridors as Judge Williams reviewed her morning docket. Case number 27 appeared routine: a foster care placement for an 8-year-old boy named Elijah Washington. Elijah had been in the system since he was 3, shuffled through 7 different homes like a child no one quite knew what to do with. His current foster family, the Hendersons, a kind, middle-class white couple from Bloomfield Hills, were seeking permanent custody. According to the file, Elijah had what social workers tactfully labeled behavioral challenges. Night terrors. Claims that his biological mother was still alive and was a judge. He drew eerie images of courtrooms and legal symbols, and he had a tendency to stare at adults in authority with unnerving focus. The Hendersons sat nervously at the front of the courtroom, hands clasped. Between them sat Elijah, small and serious, dressed neatly in a white shirt and navy trousers. Yet despite the tidy clothes, he looked like he didn't quite belong. His intense gaze scanned every detail of the courtroom, as if searching for something important, something only he could see. Janet Pears, the social worker assigned to the case, stood at the podium. She presented the facts with the practiced cadence of someone who had done this hundreds of times. She described Elijah's behavior clinically: possible PTSD, attachment issues, and aversion to authority. She mentioned his repeated claims about his mother being a judge and dismissed them as emotional coping mechanisms, common in children dealing with trauma. Then the Hendersons spoke. Mrs. Henderson, voice trembling, talked about the boy's nighttime screams, how he cried out for someone no one had ever met. Mr. Henderson added that Elijah had a startling grasp of legal terms, and even courtroom procedures. "It's like he's been here before," he said. Judge Williams listened, detached as always, scribbling notes and asking the standard questions. She had seen similar cases: children creating elaborate stories to cope with abandonment or loss. But something about this case gnawed at her. Every time she looked at Elijah, her heart flickered in a way she couldn't explain. There was something familiar in his stare, something that made her uneasy. He reminded her of someone. Someone she had tried hard to forget. As the hearing wore on, the judge began noticing things she usually wouldn't. The way Elijah tilted his head when deep in thought. How his left hand twitched when he was concentrating. And then she saw it, a small birthmark on his wrist shaped like a crescent moon. She couldn't stop herself from studying him more closely. It was like her brain was pulling at threads she hadn't touched in years. She searched his face, his features, for something she wasn't even sure she wanted to find. The Hendersons finished their statement. Janet Pierce gave her final recommendation. It was all wrapping up when the moment happened. Elijah stood up. Ignoring the urgent whispers from Mrs. Henderson to sit down, the little boy stepped into the center of the courtroom. He didn't seem scared. In fact, the room seemed to lean toward him. Judge Williams felt her pulse quicken as he looked straight at her, unwavering. He opened his mouth, and what he said shattered the world she had built for decades. "You're my real mom. I remember your perfume. I remember your lullabies." Gasps filled the room. The courtroom erupted. Bailiffs surged forward, unsure whether to detain an 8-year-old. Attorneys leapt to their feet, shouting over one another. The Hendersons reached for Elijah, calling his name in disbelief. Judge Williams couldn't move. Couldn't speak. She just stared at him. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She clutched the edge of the bench to keep from collapsing. Her vision swam. And deep inside a place she had locked up tightly 15 years ago, something stirred. Because she knew. She knew Elijah might be telling the truth. With every ounce of strength, she slammed her gavel down and declared a 30-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, Judge Williams remained frozen. Only when she was finally alone did she move, her fingers fumbling with a locked drawer beneath the bench. She pulled out a small photograph worn and hidden for over a decade. It was a baby boy, same dark, thoughtful eyes. Same crescent moon birthmark on his wrist. She stared at it, hands shaking, the silence in her chambers deafening. The photo was aged, creased from years of secret glances. She had kept it buried beneath official court files, never allowing herself to stare at it for more than a moment. But now she couldn't look away. The memories came flooding back, fierce and unstoppable. Like a dam had burst in her mind. She was 27 back then. A rising star in the legal world. A brilliant young attorney burdened with impossible expectations. Her family name carried weight in Detroit's legal circles. Her father, a former prosecutor. Her grandfather, one of the city's first black judges. And in the middle of it all there was a secret. A child. The child she was never supposed to see again. Her grandfather had shattered barriers in the 1960s, and Rebecca had always been destined to be the crown jewel of their legacy, the one who would rise even higher than those who came before her. But then everything changed with the pregnancy. She had managed to hide it for 6 months, paralyzed by fear of what it could do to her future. This was the late 2000s, and even then, being a single, black woman in the legal profession, especially one on the rise, was a death sentence for a career. When her mother finally discovered the truth, her response had been brutal. "A black, unwed mother will never wear a judge's robe," she said with cold certainty. "You have a decision to make, Rebecca, your career, or that baby. You can't have both." That was when Robert Sterling, the family's trusted attorney, had stepped in with what he pitched as the ideal solution. He specialized in quiet, private adoptions, confidential placements for families facing delicate situations. He promised her the child would be placed with a loving couple, people desperate to be parents, people who could offer a secure life she couldn't afford to give as a young, struggling lawyer. It would be completely sealed, confidential, no record, no trail. She would never know where the baby went. She would never see him again. It would be like the pregnancy had never happened. And Rebecca had agreed. She was young. She was terrified. And she genuinely believed it was the only way. She told herself she was doing the right thing, giving her son a better chance, a better life. But when the nurses placed her newborn in her arms at Tuhama Medical Center, she knew immediately that she was making a heartbreaking mistake. She had 2 short hours with him. 2 hours to memorize his tiny face, to hum the lullabies her own mother once sang to her, to inhale his soft baby scent and silently promise she would never forget him. She whispered words of love, of sorrow, of hope that someday he would understand why she let him go, why it broke her to do so. When Sterling's people came to collect the child, it felt like a piece of her soul had been ripped away. She had given him a name in her heart, Daniel, even though she knew his adoptive parents would probably rename him. Now, 15 years later, sitting alone in her chambers, dread tightening in her chest, she realized something that chilled her to the bone. Daniel might be Elijah Washington. The same Elijah who had stood in her courtroom and called her mom. She picked up the phone and called the one person she trusted for delicate matters, David Knox, a former detective who had been her private investigator for 5 years. When he answered, her voice was low and shaking. "David, I need you to look into a child's background. His name is Elijah Washington. 8 years old. Currently in foster care with a family named Henderson. I need everything: his history, placements, and especially any adoption paperwork from when he was a baby." David was used to handling everything from background checks to security threats for high-level clients. But he had never heard her sound like this. "Judge Williams, you sound like you've seen a ghost." Her laugh was humorless, hollow. "Maybe I have, David. Maybe I have. Whatever it takes, I need this information by tonight. Pull every string you've got." While David launched into the investigation, Rebecca learned that Elijah had been taken to Child Protective Services for an urgent psychological assessment, standard procedure after an emotional courtroom disruption. They needed to determine if the boy was experiencing a mental health episode or posed any safety concerns. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the court's lead child psychologist, was overseeing the evaluation downtown. Rebecca knew she wasn't supposed to interfere, but she made the call anyway. "Sarah, it's Rebecca. I know you can't give details, but I need to understand if there's anything unusual about Elijah Washington's evaluation. There are factors at play in this case that may need special handling." Sarah, who had worked with the court for nearly a decade, had never received a call like this from Judge Williams. "I can't share the full report, you know that," she replied cautiously. "But I will say this. The boy is extraordinary. His memories are vivid. Specific. Too specific. He's described your courtroom down to personal details no stranger should know." Rebecca's breath caught. "What kind of details?" "He drew a picture of your private restroom," Sarah said quietly. "He included the lavender soap dispenser. The framed Scales of Justice photo on the window ledge. How would an 8-year-old know those things unless—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. That afternoon, Rebecca scoured Elijah's case files using her judicial access. The deeper she dug, the more disturbed she became. Elijah had bounced through 7 foster homes since age 3. The first placement, with the Clarks, lasted just 6 months. They claimed he was too emotionally volatile. Their file included notes about Elijah screaming at night, shouting that his real mother was coming to get him, and flying into panic attacks at the mention of adoption. The second home, the Jan's sons, returned him after 8 months. They described him as obsessive. He would fixate on judges he saw on TV, insisting he recognized them. When they punished him for lying, they made him sleep in the garage. His insistence that his mother was a judge had become a recurring theme. Each new foster placement grew shorter, more strained. Over and over, Elijah was labeled as too intense, too difficult, or too intelligent for his own good. Therapists attributed his beliefs to psychological trauma. Social workers diagnosed him with detachment disorders. But none of it explained why he clung so fiercely to the idea that his mother was still alive and waiting for him. When David finally called back around 6 p.m., his voice was heavy. "Rebecca, I found some things, but you're not going to like them." She braced herself. "Go on." Elijah Washington's adoption records gone. Wiped out. Supposedly destroyed during a routine document purge at Sterling Family Services in 2018. Rebecca's stomach dropped. "But there's more," David continued. Sterling's license was revoked that same year. The official reason: procedural irregularities in placements. But off the record they were involved in some dark stuff. She sat in stunned silence. "What kind of irregularities, David?" "The kind where babies were never legally adopted," he said grimly. "The kind where desperate mothers were told their kids were going to good homes, but the children ended up lost in the foster system, buried under false names." A chilling silence followed. "Rebecca, I think you need to prepare for the possibility that your son never left Detroit. He's been here the whole time." The next morning, Rebecca met David at Mel's Diner, a rundown spot in a rough part of downtown. It was the kind of place her colleagues would never think to step into, which made it perfect for a private conversation. David slid a thick folder across the scratched formica table. His face was pale, eyes tired. "What I found," he said, "is going to change everything." Rebecca's fingers trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were documents, surveillance shots, and a timeline that made her blood run cold. David had worked through the night, reaching out to old contacts, off-the-record sources in law enforcement, CPS, and even black market investigators who specialized in unraveling what powerful people wanted kept buried. "Elijah Washington's birth certificate is fake," David said in a low voice. "The names listed, Jennifer and Marcus Washington, were a real couple. They died in a car crash in 2016. But they didn't have any children. No record of Elijah. No adoption. Nothing." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. "That's not the worst part," David went on. "Sterling Family Services wasn't just sloppy. They were running a full-blown black market adoption ring. They took newborns from vulnerable mothers, promised them loving homes, then either sold them or dumped them into the foster system when deals fell through. They created false identities using names of dead people just like Elijah's." Rebecca's head was spinning. Her son had never been adopted. He had never left the system. He'd been right there, lost in plain sight, for 15 years. When the children got too old to be considered marketable, Sterling would quietly push them into the foster system under new, falsified identities, effectively erasing them. The weight of that reality hit Rebecca like a punch to the chest. "You're telling me," she said, voice cracking, "that my son was never adopted by a loving family, that he was thrown into the system when he was only 3? David Knox gave a grim nod. "And it gets worse," he said. "I managed to pull some of Sterling's old financial documents before the files were sealed. Your family paid $300,000 not as an adoption fee, Judge. That was for what they labeled a total identity erasure. It was a buyout to guarantee the child would never be traceable. Ever. Rebecca stared down at the papers through eyes clouded with tears. The numbers were right there. The invoice was clear. Her own mother had paid extra to ensure that her grandchild would disappear without a trace. That no one could ever find him. That Rebecca would never get the chance to change her mind. The same woman who raised her to believe in justice and truth had deliberately orchestrated the disappearance of an innocent child. Meanwhile, 20 miles away, in a modest house nestled in a quiet Detroit neighborhood, 8-year-old Elijah Washington was getting used to his latest temporary home. His new placement was with Patricia Williams, a retired schoolteacher in her late 60s who had been fostering emergency care children for over a decade and a half. She had seen just about everything: children who came from unimaginable trauma, children who learned not to trust, children who barely spoke. But Elijah was different. While most kids his age would be glued to cartoons or playing video games, Elijah spent his time flipping through Patricia's old legal textbooks. He asked detailed questions about court procedures and used complex vocabulary with uncanny ease. On his second morning in the home, he looked up from a dusty, dog-eared volume of Michigan family law and asked, "Ms. Patricia, why do judges wear black robes? Is it because they're supposed to be like shadows of justice?" Patricia almost spilled her coffee. That was not the kind of question most 8-year-olds asked. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, "where on earth did you learn a phrase like that?" Elijah's face turned thoughtful. His gaze drifted, like he was watching a memory play out that only he could see. "My real mom taught me," he said softly. "She told me judges are like guardians. Their robes are black to remind people that justice isn't supposed to care about color or money or power. She said the gavel is like a magic wand, it can fix things, make things right." Patricia sat beside him, heart tightening as she studied his solemn face. In all her years fostering, she had heard plenty of children invent stories about birth parents. It was a coping mechanism. But those stories changed, got grander, more confusing over time. Elijah's didn't. His memories were precise. They didn't shift. They were anchored in real detail. "Tell me more about your mom, sweetheart," she said gently. His eyes lit up, and it broke her heart. "She smells like lavender and vanilla," he said. "She has the prettiest singing voice, especially when she sings the Mockingbird Lullaby. Her hands are soft, but strong. She has a little scar on her thumb. She got it when she was learning to cook and cut herself. She told me no matter how far they took me, she'd always find me." Patricia felt a chill ripple down her spine. These weren't the scattered fantasies of a child. These were vivid recollections of someone real. "Elijah," she asked softly, "how old were you when you last saw her?" "I was 3, he said, nodding. "But I never forgot. They told me she died, but I knew they were lying. I could still feel her loving me, looking for me. And yesterday, in that courtroom when I saw her up there in her black robe with the gavel, I knew. I knew my mom had found me." The phone rang before Patricia could respond. It startled both of them. She picked it up and froze. It was Judge Rebecca Williams. Her voice was tight with emotion. "Mrs. Williams, this is Judge Rebecca Williams from Family Court. I need to ask you. Has Elijah said anything about his memories of his birth mother?" Patricia glanced at the boy sitting next to her, his dark eyes watching her with quiet intensity. "Judge," she said carefully, "this child has told me things that no normal 8-year-old should know. Specific things. Deep things. And after what happened in your courtroom, I'm beginning to believe we need to take what he is saying very seriously. There was a pause on the line. Then Rebecca's voice came through, quieter than before. Mrs. Williams. I'm going to ask you something that could get both of us into serious trouble. I need to speak to Elijah in private. I can't go through official channels. There are things about his case that I must investigate immediately. Would you be willing to arrange an unofficial meeting? Patricia looked at Elijah again. His face had changed the moment he heard the judge's name. There was hope now radiating from him like light. Judge Williams, she said quietly, that little boy has waited his whole life for his mother to find him. If there's even a chance that we owe it to him to find out. She paused, then added, come tonight. After dark. And Judge, prepare yourself. You might discover more than you ever expected. Now let me ask you, do you think Judge Williams should put everything on the line to discover the truth? Speech balloon. Comment 1 if you believe she should take the risk, even if it costs her everything. Thumbs up. Hit the like button if you're just as emotionally invested in this story as we are, and be sure to subscribe because what's about to unfold next will change everything you thought you knew. What do you think will happen when Rebecca comes face to face with Elijah in private? Is it possible he still remembers her after 15 years, or is this all a painful mistake? The answer is more shocking than you can imagine, and it's coming up next. At exactly 9 p.m. Rebecca Williams pulled into Patricia's driveway, her heart thudding so hard she could feel the pounding in her throat. She had spent the day battling with the decision. What she was about to do could ruin her career, destroy her standing in the legal community, and potentially open her up to criminal charges for misconduct. But she couldn't stay away. The thought that Elijah might truly be her son Daniel had consumed her every thought. She couldn't eat. Couldn't concentrate. Couldn't breathe until she knew the truth. She sat in her car for several long minutes, trying to summon the strength. Through the window, she could see Patricia and Elijah sitting on the couch together. The boy was bent over a book. Even from the car, even in the dim light, there was something in the way he held his head, in the slope of his shoulders, that felt achingly familiar. When Patricia opened the door, Elijah stood beside her. And the moment Rebecca stepped into the house, her entire world shifted. Elijah took one look at her and ran. He flung himself into her arms with a sound like pure, joyful relief. "Mommy," he cried, "I knew you'd come. I knew you didn't forget me." Rebecca caught him instinctively, arms wrapping around him as though they had never let go. 15 years of buried grief and longing exploded inside her. He fit perfectly against her, just like he had all those years ago. But it was his next words that undid her completely. "You still smell like lavender and vanilla," he whispered, eyes brimming with tears. "Just like I remembered." Patricia stood nearby, speechless, watching as Elijah began sharing things with Rebecca that no 8-year-old should remember. He described her car, the tiny dent on the rear bumper, the pine tree air freshener hanging from the mirror. He knew about her favorite cafe, where she went every Sunday morning to sip hazelnut lattes and read the paper. He even knew about her birthday tradition, visiting the botanical gardens alone, to find peace. "How do you know all of this, baby?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling, though her heart already knew the answer. "I used to go with you. Before they took me. You carried me in a blue baby seat. You used to talk to me about everything we saw. You said the names of all the flowers. You told me gardens were proof that beautiful things can grow, even in the hardest ground." Rebecca's eyes welled with tears. The memories she had tried so hard to forget, he had kept them alive. "And children aged out of being marketable, Sterling would quietly drop them into the foster system under fake names, effectively erasing them from existence. The enormity of that truth hit Rebecca like a freight train. "You're telling me," she said, her voice quaking, "that my son wasn't adopted into a loving home, he was just dumped into the system at age 3. Knox gave a solemn nod. "And there's more. I managed to dig into Sterling's old financial records before they were sealed. Your family paid $300,000. But that wasn't an adoption fee, Judge. That was a payment for what they called a full identity wipe. They were paid to make sure your son could never be traced. Not even by you." Rebecca's eyes blurred as she stared at the documents in her trembling hands. Right there, in black and white, was the damning truth: her own mother had paid extra to erase her grandson completely. No paper trail. No hope of reunion. No chance for Rebecca to change her mind. The same woman who preached justice and legacy had ensured that a child would vanish. Meanwhile, just 20 miles away, at the home of Patricia Williams, Elijah was trying to settle into what was now his latest temporary home. Patricia, a 68-year-old retired educator, had spent over 15 years caring for emergency foster kids. She'd seen every kind of heartbreak, every kind of trauma. But Elijah Washington was something different. While most kids wanted cartoons or toys, Elijah buried himself in her old law books, asking questions that most college students wouldn't think to ask. On his second day, he looked up from a battered copy of Michigan Family Law and asked, "Ms. Patricia, why do judges wear black robes? Is it because they're meant to represent shadows of justice?" Patricia nearly choked on her coffee. "That's not something most 8-year-olds ask," she said. "Where do you learn to talk like that, honey?" Elijah's eyes drifted to a place far away. His tone turned soft, like he was remembering a dream. "My real mom taught me. She used to say judges are guardians. That their black robes remind people that justice isn't supposed to see color or power or money. And that the gavel, it's like a magic wand that helps fix things for people who've been hurt." Patricia lowered herself onto the couch, studying him with new intensity. She had heard dozens of kids talk about imaginary parents. Most memories faded or grew wild. But Elijah's memories were precise. Concrete. Real. "Can you tell me more about your mom, sweetheart?" His face lit up with joy. She smelled like lavender and vanilla. She had the prettiest voice, especially when she sang the Mockingbird song. Her hands were soft and strong. She had a scar on her thumb from when she cut herself cooking. She promised me she'd find me, no matter how far away they took me. Patricia shivered. These weren't fantasies. These were lived moments, held deep in a child's mind. "Elijah," she asked gently, "how old were you the last time you saw her?" "I was 3. But I never forgot. They told me she died, but I knew that wasn't true. I could feel her still loving me. And when I saw her in that courtroom yesterday, sitting there in her robe, holding her gavel, I just knew. I knew my mom had found me." Before Patricia could speak, the phone rang. It was Judge Rebecca Williams. Her voice was taut with emotion. "Mrs. Williams, this is Judge Rebecca Williams from Family Court. I need to ask, has Elijah mentioned anything about his memories of his birth mother?" Patricia looked at the boy sitting beside her, who now watched her with a kind of soulful urgency. "Judge," she replied slowly, "he's been telling me things no child his age should be able to remember. And after what happened in your courtroom, I think we have to take his memories seriously." There was a long pause. Then Rebecca whispered, "Mrs. Williams. I'm going to ask something that could put us both at risk. I need to speak with Elijah privately. Off the record. There are aspects of his case that need urgent, unofficial attention. Would you be willing to help arrange that?" Patricia looked again at Elijah, whose eyes filled with hope at the sound of the judge's name. "Judge Williams, that boy has waited his whole life for his mother to find him. If there's even the smallest chance you're her, then we need to find out. Come tonight, after dark. But be ready for what you might discover. And now I have to ask you, should Judge Williams risk everything to uncover the truth? Repeat button. Comment 1 if you believe she should take that risk, even if it costs her everything. Thumbs up. Hit the like button if this story has you on edge like it does me. Movie camera. Subscribe now because what happens next could change everything. What do you think will happen when Rebecca finally comes face to face with Elijah outside the courtroom? Will he truly remember her, or could it all be a tragic coincidence? Trust me, the truth is far more shocking than you expect. That night at exactly 9 p.m. Rebecca Williams pulled into Patricia's driveway, her heartbeat pounding like a drum inside her ears. She had wrestled all day with the decision. What she was about to do could end her career, destroy her name, and possibly result in criminal charges. But the possibility that Elijah was really her son Daniel had consumed every moment of her consciousness. She had no choice. She sat in the car for several long minutes, forcing herself to breathe. Through the window, she could see Patricia and Elijah on the couch, reading a book. And even from a distance, in that dim light, there was something in the way he sat, the way he tilted his head, that struck her like lightning. When the front door opened and Patricia stepped aside, Elijah was already standing there, and when Rebecca crossed the threshold, her world spun. He ran straight into her arms without hesitation. "Mommy!" he cried. "I knew you'd come. I knew you didn't forget me." She caught him instinctively, clutching him as though letting go might shatter them both. All the years of guilt, grief, and longing burst from her chest. He fit perfectly in her embrace. Just like he always had. But what truly broke her heart, was what he said next. "You still smell like lavender and vanilla," he whispered through tears. "Just like I remembered." Patricia stood by in stunned silence as Elijah began recalling things no 8-year-old should know. He described her car down to the dent in the bumper and the pine tree air freshener on the mirror. He knew about her Sunday morning coffee ritual, hazelnut lattes and a newspaper. He even knew about her birthday tradition of visiting the botanical gardens alone, a secret she had told no one. "How do you know these things, baby?" Rebecca asked, though her heart already knew. "I used to go with you, before they took me. You carried me in a blue baby seat. You'd name all the flowers and say that gardens prove beautiful things can grow, even in the hardest places." Rebecca's eyes filled again, tears spilling down her cheeks as the floodgates of memory broke open, front of the remaining children, her body forming a protective barrier between them and the man who had orchestrated their suffering. Robert Sterling, now in his 70s, still radiated the chilling authority of a man who had built an empire out of other people's pain. His eyes were sharp and emotionless, scanning the scene like a general surveying a battlefield. Armed men flanked him, mercenaries masquerading as security, each one armed and ready to follow his command without question. Well, Sterling said, his voice cold and eerily calm as he approached Rebecca. "Judge Williams. I always knew you were smarter than most. But this." He gestured around the facility, at the freed children and the chaos. "This is career suicide." Rebecca's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "You trafficked children. You lied to desperate mothers. You turned a legal system into a marketplace. And you stole my son. Sterling's lip curled in a mocking smile. Your son was never supposed to be your problem anymore. You signed the papers. You knew the terms. I was manipulated. Lied to. You and my mother ensured there was no trail, no hope. But he remembered. And now so do I. His gaze darkened, the amusement draining from his face. You think anyone's going to believe you've broken the law tonight? You're the one who'll go down. Me, I have friends in high places, judges, prosecutors, senators. They won't even let this make it to a courtroom. Judge Phillips stepped forward, her own fury barely contained. So did I. I had connections too. You took my daughter. You made us believe she was dead. I don't care who protects you tonight, this ends. Sterling's men began to close in, weapons raised. But then, an unexpected sound pierced the tension. Sirens. Lots of them. From all directions. Blue and red lights flared through the trees as federal vehicles surrounded the compound. Helicopters roared overhead. For the first time, Sterling looked uncertain. Detective Maria Santos raised her badge high. You thought you owned everyone, Sterling. But not all of us were for sale. FBI agents poured in, quickly subduing Sterling's security team. Chaos erupted, but within minutes, Rebecca, Phillips, and Santos were surrounded by allies. David Knox reappeared, breathless but triumphant. We got them, he said. Elijah made it to the safe house. And the data you found, we uploaded it to federal servers before you even triggered the alarms. Sterling was handcuffed, his face a mask of disbelief. You think this changes anything? He spat. People like me don't go down. Rebecca stepped closer, her voice now a blade. No. Monsters like you go down hard. Rebecca Williams sat in the defendant's chair, the same hard wooden seat where she had once presided over countless trials, doling out justice with measured authority. But this time, the gavel was not in her hand. The irony stung like acid. She was being prosecuted in the very courtroom where, just weeks ago, her son Elijah had stood and unknowingly unlocked a conspiracy that had haunted both of their lives. The charges against her were grave: judicial misconduct, obstruction of justice, unauthorized access to sealed court records, and multiple violations of federal and state judicial ethics laws. If convicted, she faced up to 15 years in federal prison. The prosecutor, a sharp-jawed man named Assistant U.S. Attorney Grant Milner, had made it clear that this case was about restoring faith in the rule of law. But Rebecca knew better. This wasn't about the law. It was about vengeance, revenge by a system embarrassed and exposed, now lashing out to protect its own. Outside the courthouse, the nation was split. Crowds lined the steps, their voices rising in chants of "Free Judge Williams" and "Justice for Stolen Children," while others carried signs that read "No one is above the law and judges must follow rules too." The media circus was relentless. Every major network had set up outside the courthouse, broadcasting every word, every expression. Some called her a hero. Others called her a vigilante. Rebecca knew the truth was somewhere in between. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the prosecution's star witness was led in, Robert Sterling himself. He was thinner now, paler, his once meticulously tailored suits replaced with a prison-issued jumpsuit, but his eyes still radiated the same icy arrogance that had allowed him to orchestrate the destruction of thousands of lives. Shackled at the wrists, he still smirked as if he were the one in control. He had struck a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Rebecca, his sentence for conspiracy, child trafficking, and obstruction had been reduced from life without parole to 30 years in a minimum security facility. It was his last grasp at control, his final shot at discrediting the woman who had shattered his empire. Rebecca's defense attorney, David Chen, a former federal prosecutor with a reputation for eviscerating witnesses, leaned over to her. He's going to lie, gaslight, manipulate. He'll try to rewrite history on that stand. Stay calm. Let me dismantle him piece by piece. Sterling took the stand with all the theatricality of a man born to deceive. He painted Rebecca not as a grieving mother, but as a dangerous radical who had used her robe to wage war on the justice system, fabricating accusations to justify an illegal break-in at a licensed youth facility. He claimed she had manipulated children's memories, faked digital evidence, and staged the viral live stream to win public sympathy. She was willing to burn down the entire legal system, Sterling testified, voice calm and venomous, just to salvage her own legacy. This wasn't about saving children. It was about ego, hers. Rebecca's hands clenched beneath the defense table. Her career, her son's life, her integrity, he had trampled all of it and now expected to walk away clean. When it was David Chen's turn to cross-examine, he rose slowly, adjusting his glasses. His voice was surgical, polite, but lethal. Mr. Sterling, Chen began, you claim Judge Williams orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to destroy your reputation. And yet, we have dozens of children, including her own son, who have testified to being locked in cages, subjected to psychological abuse, and told their parents were dead. Are they part of her ego trip as well? Sterling faltered for the first time. We have video evidence of you attending meetings where children were auctioned to foreign buyers. Are those fabricated too? Objections came flying from the prosecution, but the damage was done. Chen was methodically dismantling Sterling's credibility, showing the jury that the man accusing Rebecca was a proven trafficker, a manipulator, a monster with no moral compass. And then came the DNA test. Introduced by the defense on day 4 of the trial, the results were undeniable. Elijah Washington was biologically Rebecca Williams' son. The jury audibly gasped as the document was displayed on the courtroom monitor. A mother had risked everything, not for ego, not for theatrics, but for blood, her own flesh and blood. It was a turning point. One by one, witnesses testified, federal agents who had raided Riverside Youth Center, medical professionals who had treated the rescued children, even Elijah himself, who appeared via closed-circuit camera. The boy's testimony was both heartbreaking and powerful. I remembered her, he said. They told me my mom was dead, but I never believed it. And when I saw her in court, I knew I was right. She didn't forget me. She came for me. By the end of the second week, the courtroom no longer buzzed with division. It was quiet, focused. Watching not a criminal trial, but a reckoning. In closing arguments, David Chen stood before the jury with calm conviction. Yes, my client broke the rules. She broke into a facility. She accessed sealed files. She made decisions that no judge should ever have to make. But she did so to rescue her child and dozens of others from a system so corrupt it buried those children alive. If the law cannot protect our most vulnerable, then the law must answer for that. And if Judge Williams must be held accountable, then let it be by a jury that understands the difference between justice and bureaucracy. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood with tears in her eyes. On all counts, she said, voice trembling, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted, some weeping, some cheering. Rebecca sat frozen for a moment, disbelief, and relief washing over her in waves. And then she did the only thing she had longed to do since the nightmare began. She walked out of that courtroom, into the arms of her waiting son. Elijah threw his arms around her, and this time, there were no locked doors, no chains, no cages between them. Just a mother and her son free. But Rebecca knew this was only the beginning. The nation had awakened to the darkness hidden in the cracks of its institutions. Her story had become a rallying cry, not just for accountability, but for radical reform. And Rebecca Williams, once a judge, now a symbol of resistance, was ready to lead that fight. One evening in early spring, the soft golden light of sunset filtered through the windows of their modest apartment. Rebecca sat across from Elijah at their kitchen table, reviewing a stack of legal documents while he quietly worked through his math homework. The gentle hum of city life outside, car horns, dogs barking, children laughing, formed a comforting backdrop, a soundtrack of normalcy that neither of them took for granted anymore. Elijah, now 9, looked up from his workbook, pencil in hand, his brow furrowed with a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. "Mommy," he said softly, "do you ever regret becoming a judge? I mean, if you hadn't been on the bench, maybe Mr. Sterling wouldn't have targeted us. Maybe none of it would have happened." Rebecca froze for a moment, her pen hovering above the page, the question hanging in the air like smoke. It wasn't the first time she'd asked herself that. During sleepless nights in the aftermath of the trial, or in the quiet spaces between meetings with survivors and lawmakers, the question had crept in like a shadow. What if she had chosen a different path? What if she'd never worn the robe, never entered that courtroom, never made herself a target? She reached across the table and gently took Elijah's hand, her fingers enveloping his small, ink-smudged ones. "Elijah," she said, her voice steady but tender, "there was a time when I did wonder that. When everything felt like it had been shattered because of choices I made. And it's true, if I had chosen a different career, maybe we wouldn't have been in Sterling's path. Maybe our lives would have been safer." He looked down at the table, nodding slightly, but she gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "But then I think about what we've done," she continued. "Not just you and me, but all the children we saved. The families we helped reunite. The laws that are changing because people finally saw what was happening behind closed doors." She paused, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead, watching the way his eyes searched hers for something solid, something true. "I became a judge because I wanted to protect people," she said. "And when the system turned out to be broken, when I realized it was hurting the very children it claimed to serve, I had to make a choice. Not as a judge. Not even as a lawyer. But as your mother." Elijah blinked slowly. "So, you don't regret it?" Rebecca smiled, though her eyes shimmered. "I regret that you were hurt. I regret that you had to go through so much. But becoming a judge gave me the tools and the voice to fight back. To bring you home. To fight for the others who didn't have anyone." He looked thoughtful, then nodded, slowly but firmly. "I'm glad you were a judge, Mommy. Because if you weren't, maybe no one would have found me. Maybe I'd still be in that basement." Rebecca leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. "I will never let you go back to that place. Ever. And I'll keep fighting for you, and for every child like you, for as long as I live." They stayed like that for a while, the quiet moment between them wrapping around the room like a warm blanket. Outside the window, the lights of Detroit flickered to life, street by street. Later that night, as Elijah drifted off to sleep with his journal clutched against his chest, pages already filled with memories he was afraid to forget. Rebecca stood by his bedroom door and whispered a silent vow into the dark. No matter how long it took, no matter how much opposition she faced, she would ensure that no other parent had to ask their child that question. And no child would have to wonder why the system had failed them. Because for Rebecca Williams, justice was no longer just a profession. It was a promise. "Sweetheart," Rebecca began, her voice soft and reflective, "I spent 22 years believing that my job was to enforce laws, maintain decorum, and uphold order in the courtroom. But you taught me something even more important. That real justice doesn't always happen inside courtrooms or behind wooden benches. Sometimes, the most important kind of justice lives outside the law, when people choose to do what's right instead of what's easy or safe." She paused, watching Elijah lean over his math homework again, though she could see the way her words stirred something inside him. He wasn't just absorbing them, he was processing them, with the same deep focus he brought to everything he now cared about. This boy, her son, who had endured trafficking, psychological abuse, and years of systemic lies meant to sever his spirit, was now whole enough to dream again. Whole enough to help others. And he was already beginning to do just that. A few weeks later, a letter arrived that made Rebecca sit down right where she stood. It was from a woman in Northern California. Her 3-year-old son had vanished months earlier, the victim of a bogus adoption agency that operated much like Sterling's old network. She had watched coverage of Rebecca's trial, had seen the raw footage of the Riverside raid, and something inside her had awakened. Using tips from Rebecca's televised testimony and public documents released after the trial, the woman had tracked down her son living under a false name with a family that had a record of prior abuse complaints. The boy was now back in his mother's arms, safe, and they were both in counseling, slowly mending what had been violently torn apart. Rebecca wept reading the letter. It was one of dozens she received every week now. Letters from parents who had found their children. From young adults who had grown up in the system and only now understood what had happened to them. From social workers and law enforcement officers who had turned whistleblower after realizing how deep the corruption ran. Each letter was a symbol. A seed of justice growing where only grief had once lived. Each story, a powerful confirmation that the pain she and Elijah had endured had not been in vain. On a quiet Sunday morning in late spring, Rebecca and Elijah knelt side by side in their small garden, their hands covered in fresh soil, planting flowers in memory of the children who had not made it out of Sterling's network alive. It had become their sacred ritual, a private ceremony of remembrance and rebirth. For every survivor, a flower. For every soul lost to the cruelty of that machine, a bloom in their honor. Elijah gently cradled a young sunflower seedling and placed it into the earth. "Mommy," he said thoughtfully, "when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. Just like you. I want to help find missing kids and bring them home." Rebecca's heart swelled with pride. She looked at her son not just surviving, but thriving, with purpose and conviction. "That would be wonderful, sweetheart," she said, smoothing the soil around a budding lily. "The world needs more people who understand that families are worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the forces trying to tear them apart." As the sun dipped low behind the skyline of Detroit, casting warm golden rays across the garden, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. That day in Courtroom 7, when Elijah had pointed at her and said that my mom, felt like a lifetime ago. They had lost so much since then. Her robe. Her bench. Their privacy. Their innocence. But what they had gained was immeasurable: each other. A family reborn from the ashes. a bond that no conspiracy could sever, no lie could undo, no court could redefine. As Rebecca watched Elijah carefully watering each plant, treating every bloom with reverence and hope, she felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. This was justice. This was healing. This was what it meant to win. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more families to fight for, more corruption to expose, more children to rescue. But tonight, they were just a mother and son. Together. Whole. Unshaken. Planning a future built not just on justice but on love. And no force on earth would ever separate them again. What do you think about this powerful true story of a mother's love rising above corruption and cruelty? If Rebecca and Elijah's journey moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us what you would do if you discovered your child had been taken by a broken system. Would you risk everything like Rebecca did, or would fear hold you back? Comment. Never give up on family if you believe every child deserves to be reunited with those who love them. Speech balloon. Share your thoughts on how we as a community can better protect vulnerable children from systems meant to help but too often fail. Red heart. Like this story if you believe justice must always serve the people, not power. Loudspeaker. Subscribe for more stories that expose injustice, uplift survivors, and remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when guided by love, courage, and conviction. Repeat button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded, even in a world full of darkness, love is the brightest light of all. Rebecca and Elijah's story is a testament to the strength of maternal love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the belief that justice is not a position, it's a calling. One that demands courage, sacrifice, and the unshakable will to do what's right even when the world says otherwise. Let their story be your reminder, sometimes, the greatest victories come from the battles we never expected to fight. And sometimes, love really does move mountains.